Principles of verifiability and falsifiability. Two criteria for judging the scientific value of a given proposition according to the extent to which it is subject to proof, verification, or disproof, falsification. According to both principles, only things that can be addressed in these terms are the valid object of scientific research. Metaphysics, religion, ethics, and other matters of opinion and belief are considered scientifically meaningless, since they are outside the scope of empirical investigation. The principle of verifiability was at the core of logical positivism, the early 20th century movement that sought to apply the precepts of logic and empirical science to all fields of thought. It states that a theory that is not at least capable of empirical verification, for instance, the existence of God, is by definition meaningless. However, verifiability was vulnerable to the charge that the principle was itself unverifiable. In The Logic of Scientific Discovery, 1934, the Austrian-British philosopher of science, Karl Popper, also attacked it, but from another angle. He argued that universal propositions, such as the law of gravity, can never be definitively verified. Cumulative evidence and repeated experimental results merely increase the probability that a proposition is sound. We accept the theory of gravity not because it is possible to prove that an apple will never fall upward, but because it hasn't happened so far. Popper therefore proposed falsifiability as a more useful criterion than verifiability. Only if a theory can, in principle, be disproved can it be considered scientifically meaningful, and it is the unsuccessful efforts to disprove it that give it ever more validity. Virtue. From the Latin for manliness, the ancient Greek equivalent was arete, or excellence. Among the Greeks and Romans, as well as early Christians, virtue was generally seen as that part of character that allowed one to live a good life. Indeed, without which the good life was impossible. While today we tend to focus our ethical concerns on whether or not a given action is right, to the ancients, the central questions of ethics involved the full sense of how one should live. To Socrates, arete meant above all the proper knowledge of one's circumstances. One who knew the correct course of action in a particular situation would be incapable of doing otherwise. Plato identified the four virtues, later called the cardinal virtues, as wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Aristotle made a distinction between the Socratic, Platonic, intellectual, dianoetic virtues and moral virtues, or, as he also put it, between the abstract wisdom, Sophia, that contemplates universal principles, and the practical wisdom, Phronesis, that directs good conduct. The key to achieving Aristotle's moral virtues was to observe the mean between extremes. In the 1st century CE, St. Paul promulgated what came to be known as the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity, love. This addition to the Platonic list of virtues shifted the focus from early living to the hereafter. Medieval Christian thinkers, such as Thomas Aquinas referred to the seven virtues, cardinal and theological, all of them founded on God's grace. Not only the nature of virtue, but its origin had occupied the minds of philosophers. Most have said that virtue is one of three things: a native aspect of the character of the virtuous, inherent in their soul, something acquired through habit and learning, or a divine gift. Advocates of the native aspect view include Kant, who held that we are endowed with a practical reason that allows us to guide our lives in a virtuous manner, and in the 20th century, G.E. Moore, whose ethical intuitionism assumed an intuitive apprehension of the good. The habit and learning approach has been embraced, for example, by utilitarians such as Herbert Spencer, who maintain that social evolution includes the adoption of beneficial moral codes, and by materialists such as Hobbes and Marx, who viewed ethical systems as man-made creations. Vitalism. The theory that living beings cannot be reduced to the principles of chemistry and physics. That there is a categorical distinction between living and non-living things. Also, the related belief in a universal animating force, a vital principle, or élan vital, capable of transforming inert matter into living matter. The idea originated with the ancient Greeks, especially Aristotle, whose theory of hylomorphism postulated an infinite, omnipresent soul that predates all forms of life, engendering and sustaining it by infusing inert matter with vitality. After the works of Aristotle were rediscovered by the West in the Middle Ages, the notion of the soul as a vital principle merged with the Christian doctrine of the individual soul. The conviction that life is the result of an animating force was not seriously questioned until the 19th century, when technological advances allowed scientists to demonstrate that matter, whether organic or inorganic, is composed of the same chemical elements. The idea that the action of a vital impulse on inorganic compounds is responsible for the formation of organic substances was disproved when the German chemist Friedrich Wöhler synthesized the organic compound urea in 1828. While Wöhler's work and that of his colleague Justus von Liebig established the exclusive role of physico-chemical forces in organic synthesis, belief in the existence of a vital principle in living organisms did not begin to recede until the end of the 19th century. Contemporary scientific thought holds exclusively to the doctrine of mechanism, in which organisms are seen as purely the result of the workings of physical and chemical laws. However, psychophysiology has yet to demonstrate that human consciousness can be entirely reduced to neurological impulses. Some philosophical theories of vitalism survived in the 20th century. These include the ideas of Henry Bergson, for whom evolution was driven by a divine creative urge rather than natural selection, and those of Hans Driesch, who proposed that the Aristotelian principle of entelechy, the actualization of a being's natural potential, works as a controlling force in living things. Voltaire. Francis Marie Auré, 1694 to 1778. French philosopher and social critic, the major figure in the circle of Enlightenment writers known as philosophers, who, in a parochial and corrupt French society, championed reason, cosmopolitanism, justice, and human dignity. He was a prolific and popular writer, the author of numerous essays, stories, plays, poems, and pamphlets that castigated, often satirically, the relics of the medieval social order, particularly the clergy and the aristocracy. Voltaire was primarily known by his contemporaries for his scathing wit, which, when aimed at the French nobility, earned him 2 imprisonments in the Bastille and exile for a time in England. He was greatly impressed by English society, institutions, and thought, particularly the scientific rationalism of Bacon and the natural rights theory of Locke. He admired the English constitutional monarchy, was drawn to the Platonic idea of the philosopher king, and supported the benevolent despotism of rulers such as Frederick II of Prussia, who considered themselves the guardians of their subjects' welfare. But Voltaire was above all a champion of social, political, and religious tolerance. The saying, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," is attributed to him. The most frequent target of Voltaire's scorn was organized religion, which he considered the abode of superstition, particularly as embodied in the Roman Catholic Church. Contrary to the atheism of most of the philosophy, he professed himself a deist, believing in an impersonal God and rejecting as superstitious nonsense any doctrine not subject to reason. Voltaire is best known for his short novel Candide, a satire of Leibniz's optimistic conviction that this is the best of all possible worlds. The book was inspired by the devastating Lisbon earthquake of 1755, which, to Voltaire, demonstrated the folly of belief in a benevolent deity. Although guided by a spirit of skepticism, Voltaire believed strongly in progress, the amelioration of the human condition through the unfettered application of reason. How ordinary people live and what matters to them are what is most important to the course of the world, he felt. In his historical studies, such as the essay on general history and on the customs and spirit of nations, 1756, he therefore emphasized the culture and economic conditions of a people rather than individual personages and events. This approach helped lay the foundations of the modern historical method.